Hello and welcome to this latest UpStart Wales video podcast. My name is Owen John. I'm a partner at Darwin Gray. For those of you who are not aware of UpStart Wales is a business club for startup, micro and small businesses. It's run through a collaboration between Darwin Gray, NatWest and Webbox. And today's session, the topic is looking after your well-being in the pandemic. I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Tamplin of Canna Consulting, who is an expert on well-being, leadership and engagement. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi there.
Do you want to just introduce yourself very briefly for us?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. I run a company called Canna. You're very welcome to look us up. Twitter is Andrew Canna. And we look at and support organizations, companies, startups, large companies, public sector, third sector, private sector with their well-being and leadership needs and supports, and specifically around workplace well-being and how all of us need to look after ourselves that little bit better, and how we do that, I suppose, in a practical way, and how we do it in the context of work, because very often, well-being is an afterthought, or well-being is something we do later on in the evening or on a weekend or whatever. But actually, what we try and aim for is how we integrate well-being into our working life, so that we work well, we feel well, and we work well. So it's that sort of equation, really.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, I think there've been unprecedented times. I think it's an overused term, isn't it, by now? But the past sort of 15 months, sometimes with small or scale-up businesses, it's almost been a matter of survival mode, and almost well-being gets pushed back to the back of the queue, particularly your own well-being. I mean, I've got a couple of questions for you, and we're aiming for about 20 minutes of this session. So the first question I've got is sort of what are some of the biggest challenges you think the pandemic has presented to our mental health, our well-being, and in particularly those of us in work and business?
I think you mentioned the word survival, didn't you? And I think that's absolutely true. And I think, many organizations and businesses alike, and I've seen them, mine included, we've had to adapt, change. We've had to be more creative than we've ever had to be. The ways that we learned how to work, the ways that we learned about how to lead, run organizations, just went out the window, and we've all had to recreate ourselves. And a lot of us has done really well. I think a lot of people have survived and managed to do that. Alongside that, though, it's been bloody exhausting, isn't it? It's been knackering, for a technical term. And we're seeing now that sort of fatigue coming in. I think we spoke earlier about, Zoom calls, for example. We're recording this because actually people have got fed up with going on Zoom calls and all this type of stuff. So one of the things I suppose, the aftermath of the pandemic, the aftermath of the initial thing around how do I survive and how do I, make sure my business survives and I can pay my staff and all that really important stuff, is now thinking about me, you, myself. How do I now consolidate my well-being? And I think we are seeing a little bit of increased people burning out with fatigue and exhaustion, because actually we can't maintain those levels of creativity and pace all of the time. And I think what we need to start to think about now as we go into the second half of this year is, yes, there are still challenges. Yes, the pandemic is still around, but actually we just need to start to reflect on how do we now look after ourselves a bit better? What have we neglected maybe for our own well-being? Maybe what some bad habits have we got into that we wouldn't have got into, where maybe some people like to go to the gym and exercise. Maybe we haven't been doing so much of that. The pandemic hasn't been kind to my waistline. I'm not sure about anybody else. So there's that bit of an issue. But how do we now start to just maybe turn the dial a little bit and refocus some of that attention, some of that creativity, some of that work back on us? Because we will need that energy. We're going to need to be well going forward, because there will be some other challenges, won't there? So I think it's just that is the challenge currently for me, is turning the dial back towards our own well-being a little bit, as we go forward into the second half of 2021.
So how do we do that, I guess, is the incredibly difficult
Thank you for
question,
that.
isn't it? But
Yeah.
in terms of practical steps, practical tips for looking after our own well-being and mental health, if you like, and as business owners watching this, have you got any sort of practical go-to steps?
Yeah, well, look, you know, for those of you that know me, for those of you who heard me before, I'm a really simple person, right? I've got a simple brain. So for me, it isn't about reinventing the wheel. It isn't about doing something that's really complicated. You know, life is complicated enough as it is. Keeping things really simple. So things like, I suppose, taking time out, you know, for business owners, self-employed or business owners or anybody running an organization, whatever, it's the last thing you think about. I can't take time out. I have to work at this thing, isn't it? Yeah. But that's counterproductive a lot of the time. By taking some time out, we actually become more productive. We actually become clear. We have energy. And what I mean by time out is taking some annual leave. You know, there's a difference. I was talking to somebody last week. There's a fundamental difference between annual leave and holidays. Yeah, holidays is packing the bag and going away, whatever that may be at the moment. But annual leave is closing the laptop. Annual leave is turning the phone off, closing the laptop, whether that's for a day, 2 days, a week, whatever. But that's the first thing. Is just take some time out, because burnout happens really when we push the pedal too much. And I think that, you know, the first thing is really about time out. The second thing, I suppose, that I see less of, you know, is setting some good boundaries around our working day. And even if you're self-employed, working for an organization, whatever, boundaries are really important. How we start the day, what we do in the middle of the day, taking a break, a lunch break, and how we end that day, you know, how we disconnect for a period of time. And many of us work long hours, too many hours probably, but in that instance, it's really important to have some really clear well-being boundaries, you know, how you set up for that day, how you take a break maybe, and then how we disconnect at the end of that day, just to give us the time to unwind. It sounds fluffy, but it's really important. If you think of the brain, you know, it needs time to switch off. So those two things, the timeout and the boundaries, are really important. And I suppose the third thing I would say is, look, is communicate, talk. You know, I'm the worst at asking for help. I think, you know, as a business owner, you're supposed to know it all, whether it's HR, accounting, law. No, I'm not taking your job away, but you know, but you feel like you've got to know it all, and think, oh, I'll work it out myself, and I'll Google the answers or whatever, you know, and then you get into a pickle, and it all becomes a bit stressful. One of the biggest things, I suppose, through this pandemic is ask for help. You know, reach out. There are loads of people, there are loads of organizations. If you're struggling, talk, whether that's to a friend, family member, or somebody outside an organization. So I suppose the three tips there are not difficult. They're not earth-shattering, but it's time out, annual leave. And I suppose one of the things I've done, just to share that, is I've given myself an annual leave entitlement. You know, I work on my own, it's just me, but I've given myself 30 days a year. Yeah. And by doing that, I can keep track of that, and sort of helps me understand, well, yeah, where am I on that? Rather than say, well, I've taken half a day here, half a day there, and it all gets lost. Give yourself an entitlement, you know, clear boundaries around when work starts, when work ends, and making sure we stick to them and having things to do and some interventions in that. And then the third thing is talking. You know, we say a lot about it's okay not to be okay, and all those wonderful phrases. But the reality is, when you feel a bit anxious, when you feel a bit stressed, when you feel a bit overwhelmed, stop and talk to somebody, get it off your chest. So those are the three. You can see I'm quite passionate about those three things. So it's you know, they are important things.
And thinking about our staff, if you like, because lots of people watching this will be employing and engaging lots of people. If we put ourselves to one side for the moment, if we think about the well-being of others, the well-being of our staff, the people who we employ and we work with, are there any sort of specific tips that you would advise in that respect?
Yeah, I think, the first thing is doing it ourselves, right? Because staff, teams watch what we do. If you take a lunch break, other people will follow and all that. So it is important for the first to set the agenda and be that ambassador for well-being really within your organization. So that's the first thing. But from a staff perspective, I think there's a couple of things about listening. Every one of us, I suppose, over the last 18 months have been through some kind of anxiety, fear, wondering what's going to happen, whether that's to the job, if you're on furlough. I saw some stats the other day that 40% of people on furlough have had no contact from their line manager or boss. The first thing is the basics: listen, communicate, talk. Ask the question, how are you? How are things? Not from a work perspective, but just how are things? How are you feeling? And don't be afraid of the answer, because all of us are feeling different things. Yeah, I get good days. Today's a pretty good day. Tomorrow might be a bit of a pants day. I'm at home working. I get days where I can't be bothered. I'm really demotivated, and it's hard. So I suppose listen to what people are saying. We haven't got to have all the answers all the time, but it's listening to staff. It's making time for them to talk. It's making time for them to maybe come together and share experiences, share best practice. We're doing a lot of that with some organisations at the minute around creating just time for them to say, well, one of the things that work really well for me is this. One of the things I'm fearful of is this. One of the things I'm worried about is this. And getting people to talk to each other, which is a great opportunity for them to pick some different tips up. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is having, if you haven't, then is having some kind of well-being, I hate the word strategy, but some well-being thoughts, plans, something, and not just for 1 week, but maybe look ahead for the next 6 months of 2021 and just have something in place to say, do you know what? Yeah, we're going to support on this. We're going to help on this. We're going to take some time. We're going to have a Friday where maybe Friday Fun Day or something, whatever, but just have some things in place for staff that help one person. You'll never reach everybody and you'll never please everybody, of course, but maybe just have well-being strategy in place, and review that to make sure that we can support staff along the way. But the biggest thing is, look, listen to them. They have great ideas. I've chaired loads of these talks over the last months, and some of the things people say are fantastic, and what people are doing behind closed doors. If we share that, there's loads of ideas from loads of other people as well.
You've answered this to an extent already, but I'm wondering whether there's anything else you can add on this. But looking to the future, as we sort of emerge from this pandemic, and return to sort of a semblance of normality, whatever normality is, what's going to be big? What are the big topics? What are the big sort of challenges from a well-being perspective as we emerge from all of this?
Well, it's a fear, isn't it? Right. And I think the first thing is for business leaders, for the people who own organizations or businesses, and you're thinking what the normal is, we don't know. So from my perspective, it's taking your time. I've seen so many organizations in the last 6 months rushing into making decisions that maybe sound okay because we go along with the wave of, hybrid working, agile working, all these wonderful phrases that are around, but take your time. Because I think from a well-being perspective, we need time for clarity. We need to feel well when we make these decisions. When we make decisions, when we're feeling a bit anxious, maybe a bit stressed, we tend to make the wrong ones because we look at the moment rather than the bigger picture. On that note, I think it is looking at the bigger picture a little bit. Take some time to plan, take some time to review, take some time to listen, do all that type of stuff. But I think the other part of this is that from a leadership perspective is really about, do we have the right skills to lead teams and people in this sort of, if we go into a hybrid type of world where we're in 2 days a week, we might not see somebody for 3 weeks because we might not be in the same 2 days as somebody else and all this type of stuff. do we have the right skill set to do that? One, from a leadership perspective, and how do we lead in that type of world, and how do we engage with our teams and customers and all that type of stuff within that world, but also from a wellbeing perspective. How do we reach out? The challenge of reaching out to people who maybe are scared of coming back into an office environment, who some people want to be in all the time. How do we reach out to people who are working from home and are feeling lonely, but we never hear from them? And all those type of challenges, that's the bit, I think, because hybrid sounds wonderful. You know, I was talking to somebody the other week about agile working. And I think sometimes we mix these things up, don't we? Sort of flexi working, hybrid working, agile working. But there's a significant difference in each one of those. And agile working is for me, is the nth degree. You know, agile working, really, the true sense of the form means I can work from anywhere at any time as long as I get my work done. And but that's a huge shift from a leadership perspective, culturally, plus well-being. You know, it's when we got a well-being, when everybody's in the office in the old days, when everybody was in, we could sort of keep an eye on people, and we knew if somebody was getting a bit quiet or if somebody was a bit stressed, we could see it, couldn't we? We could feel it, and we could, but that's going to be the challenge going forward, is how do we support people when we don't see them? How do we be there as leaders for people when we don't hear from them or don't see them? And I think that's going to be a big shift in culture for people, and that's the bit that we need to support people with, develop and gain new skills in whatever world we move into. As you can see, the world's behind me. But whichever world we move into, it's, you know, we are only as good as how we feel ourselves, and I think that's really important.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's incredibly insightful and interesting. I mean, what you say about remote working specifically, I mean, it's got huge well-being benefits, but as you say, it's incredibly difficult to gauge how somebody is feeling or struggling from a computer screen, because I think from a Zoom call, you often look at yourself on screen, and that is almost like a representation of what's going on. You're not necessarily looking and listening to how somebody else is doing, whereas you would do that in the flesh, face to face. You probably would pick up signs.
Right. And how many of us have been on Zoom calls, and I've done loads, you know, done thousands of hours of training on Zoom calls, right? And I know when people aren't listening, you know, they either turn the camera off, you know, or people are just sort of, you know, what's happening outside, you know, and that's because it's natural, isn't it? You know, we don't look at a TV screen full on for half an hour, you know. But I think you're right. I think is reaching out to people, which is my worry from a well-being perspective. And I talk well-being first because well-being is the basic stuff. Well-being is the basis of it, and how we feel determines how we work, and how we work depends how we feel. So there's the equation balances out, really.
Thank you very much for that, Andrew. That's incredibly interesting. Thank you for your time as well. I would highly recommend you look up Andrew's offering on his website, Canna Consulting. As somebody who's been to a number of your sessions, they're always incredibly useful and very practical, I find. So thank you, Andrew, and thank you everybody for listening. And as I say, if you want to reach out to Andrew, then his details are available online. And thank you for taking the time to listen to this video podcast. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.